The discovery of penicillin. You know those moments where you go on a nice long vacation, only to remember you forgot to do the dishes? It feels terrible, right? Well, that's exactly what happened with Alexander Fleming in 1928. But in his case, he got home to find mold growing on his petri dishes. He must have been gone for a long time. Anyway, this particular mold was killing the surrounding bacteria. He didn't know it yet, but he just discovered penicillin, the first true antibiotic. And when you piece things together, that one small accident led to the groundbreaking discovery that saved millions of lives. Dynamite. Now, this one is for the big nerds. Nitroglycerin is a very unstable liquid chemical compound that could explode with any form of contact or friction. Yet somehow, people managed to do experiments with it. A good example here is Alfred Nobel, who, in the mid-1800s, did some research on nitroglycerin, but during his experiment he accidentally mixed the solution with diatomaceous earth, which surprisingly stabilized the volatile liquid. This led to the creation of dynamite, and things took a pretty dark turn from there. Today, dynamite is used for construction and also warfare. Discovery of plastic, the material that revolutionized many industries. You see, before this fully synthetic plastic was discovered, people used natural means to get their insulators and stuff, but these specific materials had limitations, like flammability and instability. But that's where our guy Leo Baekeland had to step in. At first, he was trying to develop a synthetic varnish in 1907. Instead, he invented Bakelite, the first fully synthetic plastic. His discovery marked a major turning point in materials science and industrial chemistry. Microwave oven. Ever looked at your microwave oven and wondered, how did someone invent this? Well, in 1945, during the war times, an engineer named Percy Spencer was working on radar equipment that used magnetrons, a vacuum tube that generates microwave radiation. While trying to improve this device, he noticed something crazy. A candy bar he had in his pocket had melted. Curious, he placed popcorn kernels near the magnetron, and boom, they popped. Next, he tried an egg, which exploded. This led him to realize that microwave energy could cook food by rapidly heating water molecules inside it. And things basically went up from there, with many people inventing multiple things, including the first microwave, using his groundbreaking discovery. Great Fire of London. The Great Fire of London happened in 1666, and it all started in a bakery on a street called Pudding Lane. It was early in the morning and somehow a fire broke out in the bakery. At first, people didn't think it was a big deal because small fires happened all the time in London. But the problem was, most of the buildings were made of wood. The summer had been super dry, and the streets were packed tightly together. Plus, there was a strong wind blowing that day. So the fire spread insanely fast, jumping from house to house. The Lord Mayor at the time didn't take it seriously either. He was told about the fire and apparently just waved it away. But by the time they realized how bad it was way too late. The fire burned for 4 whole days. It destroyed huge parts of London, thousands of homes, dozens of churches, businesses, and even the old St. Paul's Cathedral. Around 70,000 people lost their homes. Oddly enough, only a handful of deaths were officially recorded, but historians think a lot more people probably died, especially poor people whose deaths weren't documented. After the fire, London had to completely rebuild. They brought in new rules. No more wooden houses, buildings had to be made of brick or stone. Streets were made wider, and some parts of the city were redesigned. Also, new ideas about fire insurance and organized fire brigades came out of it. Deepwater Horizon oil spill. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill was one of the biggest environmental disasters ever, and it happened in 2010. Deepwater Horizon was an oil rig owned by a company called Transocean, and it was drilling for BP, the big oil company, in the Gulf of Mexico. On April 20th, while they were finishing up drilling a well deep underwater, something went wrong. Pressure built up in the well, and basically, oil and gas exploded up the pipe. There was a massive blowout. The rig caught fire, and sadly, 11 workers died that day. After about 2 days, the entire rig sank into the ocean, but the bigger disaster was just starting. Oil started leaking out of the well, and because it was so deep underwater, it was insanely hard to stop. Every day, thousands and thousands of barrels of oil were pouring into the Gulf of Mexico. It went on for 87 days, almost 3 months. In the end, around 210 million gallons of oil spilled into the ocean. It spread across huge areas, hitting beaches, marshes, and killing tons of wildlife, birds, fish, sea turtles, you name it. It devastated fishing and tourism industries all along the coastlines. BP tried a bunch of things to stop the leak, like using underwater robots, dropping giant caps over the well, even trying to plug it with mud and concrete. but it took a long time before they finally sealed it. Hindenburg Disaster. The Hindenburg disaster happened in 1937, and it's one of the most famous airship accidents in history. The Hindenburg was this massive German airship, basically a giant flying balloon filled with hydrogen gas, and it was used to carry passengers across the Atlantic Ocean. It was supposed to be a really fancy, smooth, and even luxurious way to travel back then. On May 6, 1937, the Hindenburg was trying to land at a place called Lakehurst, New Jersey. Everything seemed normal at first, but right as the crew started getting ready to touch down, the unthinkable happened. The airship suddenly burst into flames. Within about 30 seconds, the entire thing was completely destroyed. Out of the 97 people on board, 36 died, plus one worker on the ground. And what made it even more shocking was that news cameras and reporters were right there filming and recording everything. What must have caused the fire is still a mystery. Some say it may be a spark from static electricity, but after the Hindenburg disaster, public trust in airships pretty much collapsed overnight. They went from being seen as the future of air travel to being basically abandoned. Airplanes took over after that, much faster, safer, and no giant floating fireballs to worry about. 9/11 attacks. It happened on September 11, 2001, one of the deadliest and most shocking days in U.S. history. That morning, 19 terrorists from a group called Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 passenger airplanes. Their plan was to use the planes as weapons to attack important American landmarks. 2 of the planes, American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175, were flown straight into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. The first plane hit the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. About 15 minutes later, the second plane hit the South Tower. Both towers were badly damaged, and within hours, they completely collapsed. Thousands of people were trapped inside or killed trying to escape. At the same time, a third plane, American Airlines Flight 77, crashed into the Pentagon, which is the headquarters of the U.S. military just outside Washington, D.C. The fourth plane, United Airlines Flight 93, was headed for another target in Washington, maybe the White House or the Capitol building. But the passengers on board fought back against the hijackers, and the plane crashed into a field in Pennsylvania instead. Everyone on board was killed, but their actions probably saved countless lives on the ground. In total, about 3,000 people died that day, including firefighters, police officers, and paramedics who rushed in to help. After the attacks, airport security changed forever. So did how governments around the world dealt with terrorism. Velcro. Back in 1941, a Swiss engineer named Georges de Mestral went out for a regular hike with his dog. Nothing unusual, just a man and his pup enjoying nature. But when they got home, Georges noticed something annoying. His dog was covered in burrs. You know, those little spiky things that stick to your clothes and refuse to let go? Yeah, those. Most people would just pull them off and complain. But Georges didn't, and would instead became curious. He grabbed a microscope and took a closer look at one of those burrs. What he saw was actually genius. A tiny little hooks were grabbing onto loops in the dog's fur. Nature had created the perfect stick and hold design, and Georges thought, wait a minute, I could use this. So he worked on recreating that hook and loop design using fabric. After lots of testing and trying, he finally made it work. And boom, that's how Velcro was born. Safety glass. One day, a French chemist named Edouard Benedictus was working in his lab. Like many great discoveries, this started with an accident. He dropped a glass flask, but instead of shattering into a million sharp pieces like glass usually does, something strange happened. The flask cracked, sure, but it didn't fall apart. It held its shape. That was weird. So he took a closer look and realized something. The inside of the flask had been coated with a thin layer of plastic nitrate. That's what kept it from breaking completely, which gave Edouard the idea of, what if we use this idea to make glass safer? And just like that, safety glass was born. Glass that cracks under pressure but stays together, protecting people from sharp flying pieces. Today, thanks to that lucky drop in the lab, safety glass is used in cars, windows, and buildings all over the world. It saves lives every single day, all because a scientist made a mess and paid attention. Super glue. In 1942, some scientists were working hard on something important. They were trying to make clear plastic for gun sights during the war. In the middle of all their experiments, they mixed up a new formula. But when they tested it, it didn't do what they wanted. It wasn't good for gun sights at all. So they tossed it aside like, ugh, useless, without realizing they had just created something amazing. And years later, someone took another look at that useless formula. And guess what? It turned out this stuff could stick almost anything together. And not just a little stick, a hold it forever kind of stick. They had accidentally invented super glue, one of the strongest, fastest adhesives ever made. Today, super glue is everywhere, fixing broken mugs, saving favorite shoes, and gluing fingers together when people aren't careful. Titanic sinking. Back in 1912, the Titanic was called unsinkable, being one of the biggest, fanciest ships anyone had ever seen. A floating palace. Rich and poor alike boarded with big dreams, waving goodbye to the shore, thinking nothing could go wrong. But on the night of April 15th, deep in the cold Atlantic, disaster struck. The Titanic hit an iceberg. At first, many didn't even believe the ship was in danger. The Titanic sink? Never. But water poured in fast, and before long, the unsinkable ship was sinking. In the freezing dark, over 1,500 people lost their lives. There weren't enough lifeboats. There wasn't enough time. The world was heartbroken and furious. After the tragedy, new rules were made. More lifeboats, better safety drills, and stricter ship inspections. Vasa shipwreck. The Vasa was a Swedish warship built between 1626 and 1628. As Sweden was trying to become a major naval power at the time, they built Vasa with the intention to make it the most powerful warship on the planet and serve as a real symbol of Swedish strength. However, their actions were kinda too much. Because they wanted it to be very strong, they added a lot of metals, and the cannons in the ship were made of heavy materials. This made the ship top-heavy, meaning it had too much weight above the waterline and not enough weight at the bottom to keep it stable. It also had some design flaws. Yeah, there were a lot of wrong things going on here. The main reason for this is due to lack of communication between the king, shipbuilders, and the people designing the cannons. Also, the king kept demanding more firepower, so they had to do it anyway. On August 10, 1628, the Vasa set sail on its maiden voyage from Stockholm Harbor. However, it hadn't gone even 300 meters, about 0.8 miles, before a gust of wind caused it to tip dangerously. Water rushed in through the open gun ports, and the mighty Vasa sank right there in front of a crowd of horrified onlookers, killing about 30 of the estimated 150 people on board. The ship was later found, and because of this, shipbuilders and others now focus more on ship management activities, historical preservation techniques, and things that make ship sailing risk-free. Great Molasses Flood, 1919. Imagine seeing yourself having a good time in the afternoon. The sun is high, the breeze just hits perfect, and best of all, you're drinking a nice soda. That's if you like it, by the way. However, you suddenly see a huge flood of molasses coming at you. It swoops you off your feet, and next, you find yourself in the hospital because you were fatally injured. After some time, you then found out that lack of storage of the molasses was what caused such a thing to happen. Sounds like fiction, right? But actually, it did happen. You see, this molasses was stored in a giant steel storage tank, about 50 feet tall and 90 feet wide, owned by a distilling company, as it could be fermented to produce industrial alcohol. The tank was used to store 2.3 million gallons of molasses. You heard that right, 2.3 million gallons. That's really a lot. So, on one unusually warm winter day, the temperature suddenly rose to 4.4 degrees Celsius and caused the tank to explode. A giant wave of molasses, estimated to be 25 feet high and moving at 35 miles per hour, swept through the streets. This ended up leaving a lot of people in the area injured and even killing about 21 people. After some investigations, they found out that the tank was poorly maintained and even had leaks for months. The impact of this was remarkable, as it made the government enforce even more strict laws and codes in industries, making sure they properly maintain their equipment for the safety of society. Lead in gasoline. In the early 1960s, the major issues with car engines were called engine knocking, a kind of uncontrolled explosion inside the engine that reduced performance and could cause damage. Engineers were looking for a way to make gasoline burn more smoothly. However, they then discovered that adding a compound called tetraethyl lead to gasoline solved the problem. This leaded gasoline made engines quieter, more efficient, and allowed car manufacturers to build more powerful vehicles. This discovery was seen as a major breakthrough for the automotive industry, and by 1923, leaded gasoline was being widely marketed. However, there was one problem at the time. The serious health dangers of lead were not well understood. Lead is a neurotoxin, meaning it can damage the brain and nervous system. Short-term exposure can cause headaches, memory problems, and even behavioral issues. Yeah, it's that dangerous. And to make matters worse, this was already spread around cities, especially in urban areas. This made the government enforce laws against leaded gasoline, which then turned out to save society today. Chernobyl disaster. In 1986, in a place called Chernobyl in the USSR, workers at a nuclear power plant decided to run a safety test. The idea sounded simple: check if the plant could still work if it lost power. But the test was badly planned, and the workers made some serious mistakes. Within moments, things spiraled out of control. There was a huge explosion. Fire and radiation shot into the air. It wasn't just a small accident, it was one of the worst disasters the world had ever seen. Radiation spread across countries. People got sick. Entire towns had to be abandoned. Even today, parts of Chernobyl are still too dangerous to live in. This terrible event made the whole world rethink how to handle nuclear energy. New rules, stricter safety checks, and constant reminders that one mistake can change everything. Chernobyl became more than just a place on the map. It became a symbol of what happens when technology is powerful but not respected.